Take these drums, tear them asunder, turn them into plowshares. Take these weapons of murder and plunder. I don't want them in the air. You've been working on your warfare for centuries of time. All these weapons ought to get us nowhere, and no peace do we find. What peace has been won? Is it just a place between wars? Who is left to gather the blameless body when you strike a child's door? So take these drums, tear them asunder, turn them into plowshares, turn them into plowshares. Take the weapons of murder and plunder. Take these weapons of murder and plunder. I don't want them in the air. I'm calling all people of this country and all countries to resist a death machine, for its reach knows no boundaries and respects no liberty. So take these drones, tear them asunder. Ready? Take these drones, tear them asunder, turn them into plowshares, turn them into plowshares. Take these weapons of murder and plunder. Take these weapons of murder and plunder. I don't want them in the air. I don't want them in the air. No, I don't want them in the air. No, I don't want them in the air. All right, thank you very much. It's an honor to sing before Kathy Kelly goes on, and I'm going to sing this song because it's summertime, and I'm glad I have a big garden, and I'm glad for the rain. And I know who sent it. I'll tell you later. So this is a song about food, like food or war. What's it going to be? Food. All right. So this song is called Mama's Cooking, and it's metaphorical because dads can be moms too. cooking up rice and beans. Daddy's fiddling with a warring machine. He won't come to the dinner gong. Table's laden high, but something's wrong. It's gonna take him longer than he thought. He got blood stains that just won't come off, and he can't seem to clean the dirty floor. Blood still spilling from the dirty chore. Mama's been canning since the harvest came in. Bumper crops of potatoes and cabbage. Mama's always had a green thumb. Mama dances to a peaceful drum. She says there's plenty of food to go around. Hell, I could feed a whole army if we just lay our arms down, yeah. Well, you can run and run your clothes through a machine. There ain't no way that they ever come clean, 'cause they are stained with the blood of many wars, and will remain until peace and justice and all good things make them pure. Yeah, yeah, yeah. So Mama's cooking up another plan. She gonna serve it up to Uncle Sam. She got a menu that'll set them straight. Daddy may be too far gone, but it ain't too late. And we've got a good recipe for peace when other peoples are taking it to the streets. And we honor each other's love, and we share the cornucopia. Yeah, we'll have a real celebration day when Daddy finally throws his war machine away. We'll have a real celebration day when Daddy finally throws his war machine away. We'll have a real celebration day when Daddy finally throws his war machine away. All right, thank you very much. Thanks a lot.
Good evening, everyone, and a very, very warm welcome to our All Saints Parish. And Ali will be introducing Kathy in a moment, but we were so blessed here in our parish to have Kathy Kelly break open the Word this weekend. So we can tell you you're in for a big treat tonight. And as we gather, it's such a critical moment in our nation, probably maybe the most critical moment ever in our nation. It is so wonderful to have the Syracuse Peace Council and the Central New York Solidarity Resistance Coalition co-sponsor this wonderful event, because it gives us a little bit of hope in the midst, doesn't it really? Isn't it wonderful that we have those are the light in the salt in the yeast that gives us the hope to carry on, to keep on plugging, knowing that ultimately love overcomes hate, peace overcomes violence, and ultimately all will be well if the good all comes together. So we're thrilled to have everybody here tonight, and keep on plugging. Amen.
So my name is Aly Wane. I'm an organizer with the Syracuse Peace Council. I'm on the steering committee of the Peace Council. And I am really honored and thrilled to be able to introduce my friend Kathy Kelly to you all. Well, not really to introduce. So many of you in this room already know her. But I was honored to be able to say just a couple of quick things, before she gets started. So when I first was asked to speak, to introduce her, I was really excited, and I thought to myself, how hard can this be? And then I started to look up everything that she'd done in her life. And I realized that if my task was to sit here and just do a simple recitation of everything that she's done in her life, I'd be up here for another hour and you'd be waiting, for her to speak. Just simply the number of honors that she's garnered, including, Nobel Peace Prize nominations, it's an astounding amount of work that she's put in. And so I thought to myself that instead of sharing with you sort of what she's done, I wanted to share with you why so many of us in the activist community from all different corners, love and respect this woman and believe her to be, a true role model. Certainly she's one of my role models. And that is simply because she came out of the gate caring, and she has never stopped caring, bringing her caring to a political analysis that has animated so many of us. And it's kind of an interesting moment for me to be speaking about this because I've actually been taking some time off from doing activism. Many of you know I'm an undocumented activist. I've been working on immigrants' rights issues for many years. And like Father Fred mentioned, we're in incredibly dark times right now with active family separations happening at the border, and it's been almost paralyzing in its cruelty. And I had to, so the past couple of days I've been asking myself, where are the people who care? Where are the people for whom, we don't have to make the moral argument that it is absurd to jail babies, right? And as I was thinking about that, I remember thinking about an early moment in sort of my education as an activist, which was when, many years ago, when I was going to school at the University of Pennsylvania. I was studying international relations at this very elitist sort of department. To give you a sense of the professors there, our role model back then was Henry Kissinger, who, by the way, he got the Nobel Peace Prize. So that gives you a sense of how warped this country is, right? Well, the society is. But I was in all sorts of foreign diplomacy classes, and I remember being appalled at the language that people were using, language such as collateral damage, to talk about the victims of war. And if there was one issue that radicalized me, it was the issue of the sanctions regime in Iraq between the two Iraq wars. And I don't know how many of you remember this, but Madeleine Albright, who was then Secretary of State, had this very famous 60 Minutes interview in which she was point-blank told, that the US sanctions in Iraq, the so-called humanitarian sanctions, ended up killing 500,000 Iraqi children. And she was asked if that was worth it. And she said yes. And I remember feeling lost. I remember feeling socially maladjusted. I remember feeling like, where are the people who care? Where are the people who see this for the cruel absurdity that I see it? And then I hear about this crazy woman out of Chicago named Kathy Kelly, who had founded this group called Voices in the Wilderness. And what she did with her group was, and I believe it was 70 trips from what I remember reading, she did 70 trips to Iraq where she illegally brought food and medicine to the people in Iraq during the sanctions regime. And I want to repeat this. She illegally did this. She broke the law. The government was clearly trying to pressure her and her group of activists to say, look away from this. But she was like, no, I'm not going to look away. These are our brothers and sisters and kinfolk, and I'm going to bring food to them. I'm going to bring medicine to them. And I don't care what your government says, because that's the type of person that she was and that she is. And she's continued to do this with Voices for Creative Nonviolence. And I didn't want to get into sort of like all of her resume because there are too many things to talk about, but I did, when I was reading about her, one of the things that I wanted to do was to think about like what kind of a person gets to that level. I mean, what was her trajectory? So I just went back to check some of the things that she did before she founded Voices in the Wilderness and put out this challenge. And, some of the many things that she worked on, well, one of the things that stood out for me was she started out doing work in the soup kitchens in Chicago. And that made complete sense to me. It clicked, that this is not someone who looks at politics from the perspective of from on high. She's someone who's rooted in caring for the individual. And if I remember well, I believe that she was working in that soup kitchen with other future prominent activists, such as Father Roy Bourgeois, who ended up forming the School of the Americas protest. She also participated in war tax resistance. She made a trip to Nicaragua in 1985 to witness the resistance to the US-backed Contras. She somehow found some time to become a teacher after that. And starting to feel her oats as an organizer and as an activist, she decided to get into even more trouble. And she participated in an action called the Missouri Peace Planting in 1988, in which she went into a nuclear missile silo and planted corn, I believe. It was corn. And spent 9 months in jail for doing so. And that was just a part of the resume of this woman, who was gaining her sense of power, who was gaining her sense of resistance, but also who was rooted in her own sense of ethics and her own sense of obeying her conscience no matter what her country told her. And I've always admired her. I've always felt that she was my definition of success, that she wasn't someone that I wanted to be like. And one of my favorite stories about her was when I actually got to meet her in Chicago. At the time, I was working as an activist at the American Friends Service Committee, sort of a Quaker peace and justice group. And I was reading one of her books, and I was on the Chicago L, the public transportation. And I was reading her book, and I swear to you, I turned to my left, and there she was sitting right across from me. And I remember internally freaking out, okay? Because at the time, in my mind, I was just like, this is Kathy Kelly, Nobel Peace Prize nominee for Voices in the Wilderness, oh my God! And so, I totally tried to play it cool like it was no big deal, but like on the inside, I was like, this is huge, right? And I also had this moment of kind of like, we live in such a crazy country. Here is this woman who has done, in my opinion, so much for peace and justice for this country, and here, like, no one in the L, like, recognized her, And so I went up to her, and then we got to know each other. She invited me over to her place and to her community, and I got to know her, and I was just struck by her humanity. But all that to say is that this system does not value the folks who push against its culture. While it is absurd that more people don't know about Kathy Kelly, it also makes total sense, I think that the resistors are very often pushed to the side, but what I've always loved and admired about Kathy Kelly is that her light has continued to shine through. She has not stopped to continue to enlighten us in terms of the impact of the war, of U.S. wars abroad. I think as someone who was born in another country, I've always felt that it was really absurd that more U.S. citizens don't understand that they are part of a military empire that is very ruthless abroad. People don't realize that. And people like Kathy Kelly, with her kindness, her steadfastness, and her compassion, are able to shed light on this in these gentle and powerful ways. And I honestly believe that when history looks back on sort of who the heroes were, that Kathy Kelly is going to be one of those folks who will be deeply, deeply widely celebrated, and not just as an American hero, quote unquote, as someone who embodies the values of what being a global citizen is. You know, she is not someone who thinks in terms of borders. She sees suffering in Iraq, in Afghanistan, in Yemen, in all of these disparate places, and she looks at these people and she says, these are my brothers and sisters and kinfolk, and I have a responsibility to them. And I think it's only if we all start to move towards that radical understanding that we are one globe that we're going to be able to survive. And so it is with deep, deep respect, pleasure, honor that I introduce to you one of my friends and one of my role models, Kathy Kelly.
Well, thank you very, very much. I'm happy to be here with each one of you tonight. Aly, thank you for that introduction. Thanks for sitting down on the Chicago L train next to me. I remember it so clearly. And I'm certainly grateful for hospitality. It's been good to be welcomed here in Syracuse, to have spent the weekend mindful, really, of Pope Francis's words just spoken to Middle Eastern patriarchs. He said, indifference kills. And so to Father Fred and the community here at All Saints, my gratitude for the clear sense that people don't want to be indifferent here. And I'm certainly grateful to the North Central Peace Coalition, to the Syracuse Peace Coalition, and to all of the hard work that people represent here. Colleen, thanks for your beautiful voice. It always pierces right through me in a very, very good way. I think I'll just start by briefly remembering my mom. I was an almost hopelessly pious child, to the point that when Lent came, I would give up Hostess Twinkies, comic books, watching TV, anything. I mean, if I could have found a hair shirt, I would have been happy. And my young Irish mother came unexpectedly up the stairs, and I had it in my head that baby Jesus would like it if I knelt on my knuckles on the bathroom floor. So there I am, you know, it's a good thing I was a skinny little runt, kneeling on my knuckles on the bathroom floor for penance, and my mother opened the door and she said, Jesus, Mary and Joseph, how could you be so odd and be mine? So Aly, it was an early warning signal that I might be a little bit different. But I agree with Aly that oddness in our time might not be such a bad idea. To be countercultural in a time when there are many forces that would like us to believe that war is normal, would like us to believe that imprisoning babies is normal, would like us to believe that there could ever be a norm in which a child is too hungry to cry, that there could ever be a norm in which people fleeing drought in one area of the world go to another area of the world, can find no food, no medicine, no water, and the elders are eating the trees. No, 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 it can't be normal. So how are we to understand Yemen today? I'm going to ask you to indulge me in something that's pretty idiosyncratic, but it is my entryway into trying to understand more about Yemen. I am somebody who has seldom watched TV. I haven't had a television since I was 17 or watched it. I mean, for those of you my age and above, I thought Farrah Fawcett was a plumbing company. I just knew nothing. But when I would watch TV, it sort of knocks me off my socks. And so I, being dutiful before giving a talk in Manhattan College, and then later I was supposed to go to the New York Catholic Worker and be in front of my peers, and I thought I better really, bone up for this talk. And so I watched President Trump's speech to the Senate and the Congress shortly after he was elected. And this was in 2017. And I had actually never seen him on television or heard his voice before. And the next day I couldn't get up. I was just laying flat. And then I finally thought, well, I better, put one foot out of the bed and start kind of re-cooing. And I think part of what had so confused me about that particular talk was that President Trump had done what most presidents do when they give a major address. He had invited somebody to be in the gallery whose story would be so emotionally gripping that it would kind of back up or put forward, accelerate something he wanted to get across. And so he had in the audience the widow of a Navy SEAL, Chief Petty Officer Ryan Owen, who had just recently been killed in the line of duty. And the woman was so recently bereaved that she could barely keep her composure as he identified her, and then everybody, it was so strange to me, stood up and started applauding. They gave her a 4-minute standing ovation, and the cameras were relentlessly focused on her, and she was trying to keep from bursting into tears in her grief, and Ivanka's hand was on her shoulder, and President Trump was shouting over the applause, "You know he's in heaven, you know he's looking down at you, you know he'll never be forgotten." Never was there any mention about where Chief Petty Officer Ryan Owen was killed. He was killed in Yemen. And it happened that in a very remote, very rural area of Yemen, a town called Al-Ghayal, the Navy SEALs had been assigned to try to find somebody allegedly with Al-Qaeda in the Arab Peninsula. But it was a raid similar to ones they've practiced many, many times that didn't go as expected, and so when they landed, all hell broke loose. The people in the village and their kinspeople in surrounding villages came running, and they very quickly disabled the helicopter that the Navy SEALs had arrived on, and they were kind of trapped. And so they called in air support. It's 2 o'clock in the morning, and all of a sudden in a mud hut where 2 women were huddled with 12 children, a missile tore through the hut, a big explosion, and the mother of 6 of the children, her name was Fahim Mohsen, had to decide, do we stay and wait to see if we get hit again, or should she shepherd the children out of the hut? And she chose the latter. And as soon as she had her infant in her arm, one arm, and was holding her 5-year-old's hand, she stepped outside, and she was immediately hit. Perhaps a heat sensor picked up her presence, and she was hit by a bullet from a helicopter gunship and died instantly. The infant mercifully survived with just a scratch. Her 5-year-old was the witness to what had happened. And that night, in the village of Al-Ghayal, there were 10 children under 13 years of age who were killed. 6 mothers were killed. But the only life mentioned, and there wasn't even a geographical identification of where he was killed, the only life that seemed to matter was that of Chief Petty Officer Ryan Owen. But to this day, there are orphans, and there are children without mothers, and there are families bereaved. And this is something people in the United States, I believe, would care about. Indifference kills, but it's an indifference fed by an inability to know about what is happening. And that's the kind of exceptionalism that I believe is very dangerous, and it jeopardizes people's security all around the world and even in the United States. I want to talk about Change Square. In Yemen, at the time of the 2011 Arab Spring events, there were a group of people who truly deserved to be called the Arab Spring. You know, Thomas Friedman recently said that Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman represents the Arab Spring, but I don't think that's true. I think we need to refocus on the actual Arab Spring that was developing in Yemen. And it was brilliant. Young people, students in a very concentrated center of academia and art and literature and history, a city called Taiza, were gathering, and they were doing graffiti art and videos and dance, and the young women had formed in their culture, in obeisance to their culture's habits, they had worn red caps and white caps to form the flag of Yemen and marched en masse. And there were people who were beginning to make good alliances with other people, with herders and with ranchers and with people who had perhaps never marched in any kind of political action before. And they were identifying the grievances. They were raising the lament. They said, we don't have water. The water table is going down. Drought conditions threaten us. We don't have jobs. The fuel subsidies have been cut back. People are pouring into the cities, and the sewage and sanitation systems can't assist them. And the money is still being controlled by cronies, by people who've had power far too long. And they called for the exit of Ali Abdullah Saleh, who had been a dictator for 33 years. Well, it seemed like they were getting somewhere. They managed to get, for a 125-mile walk, 200,000 people to walk together. And they held their discipline. They were nonviolent throughout that time. And then, even though 50 were shot in Change Square, where so much of their idealism was centered, they still managed to maintain their nonviolent discipline. People had been sniping at them from the rooftops, but they stayed strong, they stayed together. And then there were numbers of them that were put in prison and possibly tortured, and their response was to hold a lengthy fast. These were incredibly brave students. But when it came to a time when the Gulf Corporation Council, the Saudis, and with the advice from the United States met, they said, okay, Ali Abdullah Saleh is going to go. He's gone. But it wasn't a change in policy. It was just a swap. They took his deputy minister, a fellow whose name is Abu Rabdu Hadi, and he was not elected. He was appointed. And he is now still called the legitimately recognized president of Yemen. But he doesn't even live in Yemen. He stays either in Riyadh in Saudi Arabia or in South Yemen, but he's not a legitimately elected president. And the young people's views and hopes, their efforts were sidelined almost completely. And those who had aligned with them started to say, you know, this nonviolence doesn't seem to be working too well, does it? And the civil war broke out. Now, the Saudis then decided in March of 2015 to join that civil war. And I'd like to spend some time together with you thinking, how can a war cause cholera? Cholera, the contamination of people's water with fecal matter. Well, one of the first bombings that the Saudis undertook, their bombings included bombing hospitals, mosques, buses, roadways. They bombed people that were gathering for weddings, for funerals. They bombed schools. But one of the first places they bombed was a sewage and sanitation center. And they wiped out the major crane for that center. And the workers came to work the next day, and they weren't sure how they could ever keep the center open, but they were doing their best. And the next thing they knew, the electrical facility that fueled the center was bombed. And so they weren't able to conduct the sewage and sanitation operations they usually did, and they knew that this would mean that people would be drinking contaminated water. Well, then there were more and more people fleeing to the major city of Sana'a because their areas were being bombed. They couldn't get the sewage and sanitation center up and running again, and that began the spread of cholera. And to this day, there are now 1 million people identified as suffering from cholera in one of the largest epidemics the world has ever seen. Now, Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman went on Saudi TV and he announced to his population, time is on our side. A prolonged war is in our favor. Once every 10 minutes, a Yemeni child dies. Once every 2 minutes, a Yemeni child succumbs to severe acute malnutrition. Time is not on the side of those children. But Mohammed bin Salman has found alliance. When he came over to the United States, he was met by every former president, by Oprah, by media groups. He was treated as royalty, as though in this country that fought a revolution to say there's no such thing as royal blood, suddenly the royals are in and human rights are out. And so who benefits from supporting the royals that believe they have a right to take over other people's land? Well, they're not so far from us. The people who are coordinating Lockheed Martin, Raytheon, General Dynamics, and who is controlling the United States Congress and Senate, those incredibly well-heeled and powerful lobbies. And so it becomes very, very difficult for any person to speak up about what is happening in Yemen. That doesn't mean that there isn't some pushback, and I think we should be very, very conscious of those who have said there's something desperately wrong in continuing to fuel and fund a war against people in Yemen who mean us no harm, who have threatened us not at all, people who are suffering desperately, and the United States is supplying billions and billions of dollars worth of weaponry. Under President Obama, shortly after the Saudis began to take their part and form a coalition with the United Arab Emirates and 9 other countries, the Obama administration gave them a Patriot missile system, cluster bombs, 4 littoral combat ships which were used to block the port and the major port of Hodeidah and enforce a state of siege. They were willing to go up in the air and refuel the Saudi jets, the bombing planes that would go over, drop bombs, come back, refuel, go back over, drop more bombs. Certainly under the Obama administration, the US was complicit. But when 149 people were killed in a funeral in Sana'a, the funeral of a major governing person, and they knew that many, many people that were leaders in the society would be gathered there. And first there was a bombing, and then the EMT people came to try to help rescue people, and there was a second bombing. President Obama said, that's it, we're not going to give you any more weapons. We don't believe that you target well enough. Now we have to acknowledge that the United States gave plenty of green lights for targeting civilian facilities. In Kunduz, in Afghanistan, the United States bombed a Doctors Without Borders hospital. That bombing went on for an hour and a half. The authorities at the hospital had called the United Nations, called the United States military, called the Afghan government. The Afghan military said, you're bombing a hospital. And the bombing continued in 15-minute intervals. 46 people were killed. 12 of them were staff, 3 were doctors. And so then the Saudis bombed a Doctors Without Borders hospital. And then Secretary General of the United Nations, Ban Ki-moon, said to the Saudi government, you can't be bombing hospitals. And they said, Brigadier General Azeri said, well, we'll check with our American brothers and sisters to get better guidance about targeting. A bit tongue-in-cheek, since the United States had just bombed a hospital. So we have to acknowledge the kind of green light that the United States has given in its own practices, not only for bombing civilian institutions, but also think Guantanamo. Think about our practices of torture. And right now in Yemen, and it's got to do with the predictable levels of corruption that happen in a time of chaos and in a time of war. There's terrible upheaval. People are desperate for work. And that's exactly the prescription for places to develop where ghastly and horrid torture and detention happens. And so the Amnesty International report released last week says that the United Arab Emirates is running a network of prisons. Another country, the United Arab Emirates, is running a network of prisons in Yemen, and that the people who've either been released or escaped report horrible methods of torture. In a previous report, one of the methods reported was that a human body of a prisoner would be trussed to a rotating spit and then rotated over an open fire. I mean, these are ghastly, terrifying ways of treating people, and so, of course, the young people who were so brave during that Arab Spring are not so likely to speak up. Believe me, I would be one quieted peace activist were I threatened with that kind of torture. And the human trafficking is horrible. Hassan is here from Somalia, and I know that he's had his heart broken open because of so many people that have been displaced from South Sudan, from Somalia, from Eritrea, from Ethiopia. And it's just not fair. There's a horrible drought going on top of it all. Ben Ehrenreich in the London Review of Books calls it the SEMA, the great leveler. It affects everybody. And when people's crops die, when their flocks have thirsted and starved to death, when they see that the only thing that the animals can graze on is plastic, the people have to go somewhere. And so they fled to the coast of the Red Sea. And there human traffickers can put them in dangerous and very cheap boats. Sometimes the boats capsize. Sometimes the traffickers pull out pistols and threaten to shoot people. And everybody runs in one direction or another. It's been a terrible, terrible record of very, very dangerous crossings. But I would submit that the most dangerous crossing happens when the President of the United States goes over to Saudi Arabia and dances with princes, when the Secretary of the Senate, the Speaker of the Senate, Paul Ryan, goes over and seals deals and assures the Saudis and the Emiratis, yes, we'll continue to make sure you can buy weapons from the United States. These are among the most dangerous crossings, but they're not events that your average, ordinary person in the United States is going to hear very much about. In fact, I have to tell you that at times I want to beat the pillow, weep, and shout to the skies, because first hundreds and then thousands and then hundreds of thousands of Iraqi children died of curable diseases. They died of starvation. They died of gastrointestinal diseases. And it's as though those little lives were snuffed out, extinguished, forgotten. And we should be haunted. I should be haunted by those children. They committed no crime. They meant us no harm. And are we to say that it's going to happen again? That as many as 400,000 Yemeni children are suffering right now from severe acute malnourishment. 8 million people are at risk of starvation through famine. And then when you count in the 20 million people who could die of famine from Africa, it's overwhelming. And I am the daughter of an Irish woman who grew up after the Great Famine in Ireland. And I grew up hearing about the Great Famine in Ireland, and I recently was in Dunslaugen and the Sisters of St. Bridget of Kildare, Ireland. So, Kathy, we want you to meet with our students, but would you meet them in the field? I said, okay, sister. And we're in this field, and it's already rainy, and our socks were all wet. And there was a big imposing building next door, and that was the workhouse. And that was where people went if they could no longer feed themselves or their families. And behind the workhouse was the graveyard, and it was an unidentified mass grave, and bodies were put in the grave and covered over with the sod, and 1 million people died in Ireland when there was food that could have been distributed, when there were roadways that could have transported the food. 1.5 million left Ireland and became the refugees here and elsewhere. But you know, during that same time, in northern India, China, parts of Brazil, and the Maghreb, minimally 20 million people, possibly 50 million people died because of famine. Now, I never heard about them because they weren't the same color as me, because they didn't come from the same class background as me, because somehow their lives, apparently, to many historians, didn't matter. And the only reason I finally started to realize it, I read about it in a book by Mike Davies called The Late Victorian Holocaust. The only reason I finally started to realize it was because now there's a risk of that history repeating. And so the call, the tremendous deep down call that reaches out to every single one of us, a call that gives us the chance to live together as human beings who will not accept as normalcy starvation and cruelty and torture. So I'd like to close with the words of my friend Buddy Bell. He was here with me the last time I was here. And Buddy is altruistic, and he has visions, and he just has a very, very simple song that he often sings when we're together, and it goes like this. Tear down those walls, tear down those walls. I like to see people living free. Tear down those walls, tear down those walls, tear down those walls. We like to see people living free. Tear down those walls. Thank you very much.
Oh my goodness. Thank you. Thank you. It's really hard to speak after Kathy Kelly. I am a member of Beyond War and Militarism, and our goal is to bring all of the things that are happening in our world that we don't hear about, and I think Kathy has certainly done that for us tonight. We're going to continue to do that. We've had programs on Korea. We're going to have a program with an Onondaga clan mother to talk about the colonial settler situation in their lives, that the U.S. was certainly complicit, did it, as we all, our ancestors came from Europe, and so we need to take responsibility. And I would welcome anybody that would like to join us in Beyond War and Militarism. We meet once a month, and hopefully we've been having events every month, and we'll continue to do that. We are taking August off, I have to admit. One of the things we do when we have an event is to have some kind of action, some sense of what can we do right now. And so tonight, and we've done this at many of our meetings, we have postcards. They have been addressed, they have been stamped, and they are made out to Senator Schumer, to Senator Gillibrand, and to Representative Kattau. So I would encourage you all, before you leave, to go to the refreshment table all the way to the left, and you will find these postcards. Many of them have been given to us by the Syracuse cultural workers, huge variety, and I think it's good for our representatives to get the postcards too, because a lot of them have very good messages. There are a lot that have not been addressed. Feel free to take one, but use the ones that are addressed and stamped first. What you say, of course, on that postcard is totally up to you. End the blockade to Yemen. Allow medicine and food to get through. End U.S. complicity in that war. Have an end to the weapons that are being sent from our country to all the countries in the Middle East. You can choose your message. My guess is, having listened to Kathy, that won't be hard to do.
Well, thank you, Anne, and thank you again to all of the people with the Syracuse Peace Council and the North Central Peace Coalition. I hope you don't mind if I just take a moment to recognize somebody in our midst who's been very, very important to a number of us for many reasons. Marianne Grady-Flores, would you mind standing up? Marianne came here from Ithaca, and I just had a chance yesterday here at the parish to meet a chaplain at Cornell University, and I was just bubbling. I know the Grady girls. Because the Grady sisters have done so many wonderful good actions. And right now, Claire, just released from prison in Brunswick, Georgia, posed in a live oak with spring moss covering the branches. And there's Claire looking diminutive in this huge old tree. And we're hoping that other people will fall in love with the Kings Bay Plowshares, the 7 people who went into the home port for the Trident nuclear fleet that could create 9,000 Hiroshimas. And they followed that conscientious desire to beat swords into plowshares and spears into pruning hooks. Nation shall not lift the sword against nation, neither shall they continue to learn the ways of war any longer. So our very best wishes to your very good sister and to all the Grady girls. Thank you, Marianne. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Hassan Ibrahim. First of all, I want to say thank you for coming out and giving this presentation here. When I first saw that on Facebook, I thought, you know, I really should go to that place because it's really familiar to me. You talked about just Yemen, so I was hearing your stories and where you went to, but you haven't mentioned any things about Palestine, the people of Palestinian being displaced in every year, especially every Ramadan, like literally every year in Ramadan, we see more civilians of Palestinians being displaced and more strikes going on, and even they are more famine too in there. And also, the United States is just focusing on the Middle East, and I'm from East Africa, from Somalia, and there have been a war in Somalia, and we have this group, but they have like the style of Al Qaeda or ISIS, but they have a different name, which is Al Shabaab, you can call it. But they have the same ideas and the same notions of Al Qaeda, and they have been fighting for it. The African unions, they've been fighting for it, and they've been really working on that. But these people are actually killing more civilians in the southern side of Somalia, and that's why every year in Ramadan, not only in the Middle East but also in Africa, in Somalia, we see more of Somalis flowing refugees to Kenya, and the Kenyan government is not treating them the way they expect them to be treated. When refugees, how they're supposed to be treated, their life is completely different than the life you hear. They're jobless, no schools, no good medical, nothing is healthy out there. So it's basically they live in hell or in chaos. So that's one thing I want to add to that one too. And also, as you were traveling around the world, and one question is, have you been in Gaza trip? And the other question would be, there have been more Somalis, not only Somalis, but there have been more South Sudanese, and people have been crossing in Libya, crossing all the way to Europe, and there were millions of Somalis during Obama. When he went to London for a town hall meeting, just talking about it, one student stood up and said, well, what can you do for Somalis that have died in the Mediterranean Sea? And literally, like in Egypt, they've been tortured more, and there's still another war going on in Ethiopia right now. There's this clan of Somali called Ogaden, but it's still in Ethiopia, that have been tortured, been raped, and also displaced. So as a traveler, I'm really glad to ask you that question, and I want to hear more more about that, and I really, just can't, more proud that you're here and just talk us about this. And because I am refugee and I've seen it and I've born with it and I grew up, but I've been here in this country for a very long time. But now I have the chance to basically stand up for what's right. So thank you.
Thank you, Hassan. Hassan, we need you to stand up. Thank you. I was in Gaza during the Operation Cast Lead, and a bomb exploded once every 11 minutes, from 11 at night till 1 in the morning, and then again from 3 in the morning till 6 in the morning. And truthfully, I don't really know much about ballistics. I'm not a military person. But pretty soon, I could tell, oh, that was a 500-pound bomb dropped by an F-35, or that was a Hellfire missile fired by an Apache helicopter. And the reason I knew it was because the children taught me. The children taught me this weapon from that weapon. And when it finally ended, I remember the mom in the family I stayed with sat down in an overstuffed chair. The back of her hand hit her forehead, and she said, "Can you imagine? This first time I breathe in all these 22 days, I am so afraid for my children." And at the Al-Shifa hospital, the doctor, and doctors try so hard to be kind of cool, calm, and collected. He was trembling, and his head went in his hands, and he said, "Can you imagine? For 22 days, the world watched, and nobody came to help us." I'm going to say something very harsh. I almost want to apologize for it, but it's a line that gripped me. Impotence is not an excuse for inaction. Simone Weil said that. It's true, we're outspent, we're outmaneuvered. We listen to you, Hassan, and we wonder, how can we possibly make a difference? We know indifference kills, but it doesn't ever excuse us from trying to do what we can, as you just did, standing up and speaking to us. And so we have to speak truth to power, speak truth about power. The first time I ever came to Syracuse, I was a guest at the home of Dick and Mary Keogh. And Dick just told me he's got an idea that he wants to just be face to face with the people who would like to say that killing is normal. He and Mary said, "Here's a new high five, the fifth commandment, thou shalt not kill." High five. So the challenge is enormous. If you spread the peanut butter too thin, the bread rips, so we have to focus, and that's hard to do because there's so many grips on your good hearts, on our collective consciousness. But I think that we catch courage from one another. It's a crucially important time to find ways to build bridges. And I can tell you, I derive enormous strength and energy from a group of teenagers in Afghanistan. I never thought after all those years of teaching high school that a group of 15-year-olds would be my main mentors in life, but that's the way it plays out. And I'll just say that at the end of Ramadan, these youngsters, they were kind of nervous. They realized that I was starting to talk a lot more about Yemen than I ever had before, and Wood Voices, the group that Anne described, starts sort of turning its energies toward Yemen, and what about them? Well, we would never do that. But I could understand there was something like almost silence when I had mentioned that I wished very much to get a visa to enter Yemen. I never got it. And then 2 weeks later, they called to say, "Kathy, you know it is our custom at the end of Ramadan to take up a collection to try to give the money that we would have spent on food to other people who need it." And so they took up a collection of $45.78, and could I please help them get this to children starving in Yemen? So these kids, instead of taking a bus, they walked. Instead of having those dates at the end of the Ramadan fast, they'd forego that. They'd forego bread that they wanted and water that, I mean, they contributed what they could. And this kind of belief and recognition that we're all part of one another, I believe, actually can help save us from these dire times. So thank you, Hassan. Thank you.
I'm most haunted by your sentence that indifference is fed by an inability to know. Wonder, I mean, your stories show clearly the web of complicity for all of us. And I'm wondering if you have worked with textbook writing companies, or if you could work with textbook writing companies for our public schools, and that you, through your words or answers or reflections, can give us all something to do with our Syracuse School Board. Maybe we could all start by making the Peters projection map the map that schools use instead of Mercator. But, you know, all of the web of complicity, you know, there are social studies mandates in probably all of our public schools nationwide, but I'd be really curious about this phrase, indifference is fed by an inability to know, and I think that's not a mistake. I think the powers that be don't want this stuff in our schools. So I just encourage you to work in 50 states to help us.
You know, the idea that children would be taught to be marksmen or markswomen in the schools, in their cafeterias, in their gyms, on their bellies, with pop-up targets, practicing to shoot and to kill, and then the lead coming out of the guns, creating poison, it's just unthinkable. So certainly one starting place is with dismantling junior ROTC in our middle schools and in our high schools and in our colleges. We look at other countries and think, how could they have child soldiers? And we look at other countries and we're, you know, in a sconce over how they could lock people up. But we've got rail to jail taking our teenagers and taking them off to prisons as though this is somehow normal. So this reenactment of enslavement, which is going on in our country apace, and that's what it is, a reenactment of enslavement that stretches back to the Civil War and the time following that war when imprisonment replaced enslavement. We must stand up against that. It's a new form of fascism that is creeping in further and further and further. And now with the detention centers and the money to be made, the prison industrial complex and the military industrial complex rely on government funding and corporate jobs. When you have that combination, it's very difficult to uproot those entrenched systems. And I would submit that in our country today, there's a new religion. I formerly would say that the national religion is shopping, but I've changed my mind. I believe now it's militarism. And it's so, so dangerous. Father Fred and people at All Saints Parish, I believe in the faith that you are filled with and that you exude and share with others. But I am very, very nervous that in our country today, it's almost as though the liturgies, the work of the people, the good work is becoming like a smokescreen for the real religion that is being promoted, and that is a religion of militarism. You see it everywhere, camouflage diapers. You see it everywhere with military people rappelling down from the rooftops at Franciscan college sporting events. You see it everywhere in the Amtrak trains. You see the ICE people at the public transportation places. You see people at the borders intimidating other people. When Pope Francis came here, there were militarized people getting ready to pick up people that were considered to be undocumented, undesirable. I think it's kind of like standing in the middle of a cornfield and the corn is growing over our heads and we just don't notice it. So we have to label the militarism in our society as it has taken over sports and entertainment events, as it has moved into the universities, into the high schools, into the middle schools, and begin to say we don't cooperate with people who kill. Leave the guns out.
Kathy, you're a Chicago girl, and the Pope Francis, is gradually replacing the bishops and bringing in finally some progressives into, and you got Bishop Supich there in Chicago. Have you been able to sit down with him and talk with him about what you've seen and what you've heard and what you've experienced?
Well, I was dropping big hints that I thought it was about time I got a convent, but truthfully, I haven't sat down with Cardinal Supich. I deeply admire the stances that he has taken, and I think that you're right. The current Pope is somebody who is releasing and liberating a message that actually could save us from ourselves, and I'm very, very pleased about that. I do want to mention in Chicago a priest named Father Michael Flager, who has very recently said to the Chicago authorities, it's time to shut down the Dan Ryan Expressway. And this will inconvenience people, but the inconvenience of gun violence in Chicago has caused so many, many, many deaths. And so we have a lot of work to do in Chicago, and I think that it probably is a very important time for Father Flager and others to now link arms with Cardinal Supich and keep that message of Pope Francis going. Indifference kills. And it's not just the problem of a few isolated neighborhoods in Chicago. It's a citywide problem because we have allowed various neighborhoods to be impoverished, to be sidelined, to take on all of the collateral consequences of imprisonment, and we've blinded our eyes and turned away. This will never, never, never square with Christianity.
Just one last quick one. 10 Hispanic bishops visited Palestine this past January and saw what was going on there, which is, and I really do encourage you. These guys need to get your perspective and talk with Supich and ask him if those that are fighting so hard from on the immigration battle can also pull in the Palestinian, the Middle East battle, because it's one battle. Thanks so much.
Thank you very, very much. Thank you.
Kathy, thank you for mentioning the money and the way that the military contractors keep getting more money through militarism. And I used to think with you that war tax resistance was the answer, and we did that for a while. And now I also see that it's part and parcel of campaign finance. We just heard about a study a couple years ago that said that for every dollar that a defense contractor, so-called, contributes to a congressional candidate or a Senate candidate, they get, can you guess how many dollars of work they get out of that?
And please tell us.
1,000. $1,000 of work comes back for every dollar that they contribute. So I think this is one place where we can have some influence. Senator Gillibrand doesn't take money from corporate PACs, unlike Senator Schumer, who got $100,000 from Lockheed Martin. The other way I think we can have some influence is by divesting from those companies themselves. And I'd like to hear what you think about that, if there are some ways that we can leverage the money that we may have some influence over in retirement funds, pension funds, banks, anything else that people have. And then finally, for those of us who don't have a lot of money that we can influence, where can we march and say that isn't right? It isn't right to take money from and make kids starve and not have health care. It isn't right to do that, even in the U.S.
Thank you. I think the boycott and divestment campaigns that have been organized to stop Israel from continuing to really commit what looks like almost, you could use the word genocide in Palestine. These campaigns are so very, very important, and they point away. They point away. I don't think the United States government really looks for our assent in terms of its conduct of wars and militarism. I don't think this government is looking for our advice. I think what they want is your money. I've been fortunate in being able to refuse payment of federal income tax since 1980. But I can't say that, that's a mass movement that we could count on, but I do want all of us to remember, I think we're all just about of an age when we could remember the build-up to the United States shock and awe bombing in Iraq. The world came closer than ever before to stopping a war before it started. Tony Blair was sending messages to George Bush, you better get that war rolling soon, because if the United Nations comes back with a report that says that there aren't any weapons of mass destruction, I can't bring the UK into it. They were getting very, very nervous in the State Department, in the White House, and there were massive, massive protests all across the United States, all around the world. Imagine if the Arab Spring witness to sit down and don't get up had been factored into that witness then. We came closer to stopping a war before it started. And I think we get so close to finding the courage to overcome our fears. Courage is the ability to overcome your fears. Everybody feels fear. Everybody. But we can catch the courage to overcome those fears and to look to the world that we want to create, build a better world for the next generations. What could be more important? What could be a more normal desire? And so I look to that time when people will, in a sense, be the cogs that stop the war machine. Colleen sang to us about that, and to stop that Big Daddy's war machine. In a sense, we're each little cogs. We're each that little bit of sand that could gum up the works. But I do believe that as we seek solidarity, we are 6% of the world's population, those of us living in these United States. The other 94% of the world includes numerous, numerous people who are sick and tired and weary of war, want to see an abolition of all war, and recognize that the longer that we're enslaved to military masters, the less chance there is for survival in the times we live in. The greatest terror we all face is the terror of what we're doing to our own environment. We could eradicate poverty. We could solve massive problems with disease. We could make sure that every student in the United States graduates without any debt. We could retrofit the housing stock, build bullet speed trains. We can do it all and have money left over. But we can't do it and feed the demonic suction cup of the United States military. So it's a challenge. It's a big challenge. And it's something that, we owe to the next generations to try our best never to cooperate, never to feed them, never to accept that killing should be normal. Thank you.
Thank you again, Kathy, for one of your heartfelt speeches. Last year, I went to the International Herbal Symposium. It happens in Wheaton, Massachusetts, where people get together and learn about herbal medicine. And one of the keynotes was Herbalists Without Borders. And they had gone to Haiti, where there was also the infrastructure was destroyed and people were susceptible to the same waterborne diseases. And they found that using the essential oil of lemon, 1 drop per 50-gallon barrel of water was enough to sterilize it. Mm-hmm. And so people had been sending over essential oils and homeopathic remedies because they were the smallest, easiest things to transport and were able to alleviate some suffering in that way. So I just wanted to put that out there for anyone that doesn't know about that.
Thank you. And I think that along with the prison industrial complex and the military industrial complex, we have big pharma. And it's a war on drugs that I think spills over into so many other industrial choices.
Hi, Kathy. Thank you very much for being here. I was... Before I heard you speak, I heard Ali's introduction, which I thought was stunning. I don't know if, and he mentioned any number of your facets and your accomplishments, but I felt since this is Syracuse, New York, people should know that you were one of the first people to be arrested at Hancock Air Base to protest the killer drones that are piloted from there. I wonder if you might say something about your own kind of career as a drone protester and why you think drones deserve to have people such as yourself spend so much time in prison.
Thank you, Ed. You know, just last week there was a story about people in Yemen who'd been displaced, and they had been living in an area of the port of Hodeidah wherein there probably were snipers in windows. And the drones, I think, must have been giving the surveillance, because who could be so able to identify where they think a sniper is in a window, in an apartment, in a street, in an urban area of the port of Hodeidah? And then the whole building would blow up. And so the idea that people would ever have to anticipate that they would be referred to as bug splat. And that's how our military are taught. The drone pilots are taught to refer to the people that are hit as bug splat. And then people run away, just like the woman I mentioned in Al Ghayal. Of course, she wanted to run away with her children. Well, had she made it, she would have been called a squirter. A squirter. And the dehumanization that's required in order to be targeting people on the other side of the world, maintaining the fiction that this somehow makes anybody more secure, the dehumanization that's required will, of course, evoke from other people a sense of wonder. Who are these people? And it's part of the reason why the United States is continually regarded as the most menacing country on earth. I had mentioned when I was here at All Saints Parish on Sunday that some time back I had gone to Pakistan and talked with a man who said that the code for his area in Pakistan was that if somebody knocks on the door and wants food or wants beverage, you never turn the person away. I mean, where are they going to go? You know, there's no 7-Eleven, there's no Motel 6. And so the tradition, the code, is to open the door and welcome the stranger. But today, when people do that, they could also be welcoming on the heels of the stranger, inadvertently, a hellfire missile that will blow up the family, blow up the town. And so the idea that people have to be so frightened, and that gets inculcated into the children, so that children are stiff in their beds because they're so afraid that this might be the night when their family gets hit. And I had mentioned to Hassan that I'd been in Gaza, and I myself, you know, you hear this drone going overhead, and it's going circle, circle, and you wonder, well, is this our night? Well, Abu and Yusuf and the children, Yusuf and Shahida, be killed tonight, and me along with them, because this drone is doing its surveillance. And the other thing is that these drones will never be able to tell us what we really need to know. My young friends in Afghanistan, these teenagers, they go out and they do surveys, they get surveillance, and their questions are the following. How many times a week does your family eat beans? Nobody eats meat. What's your source of water? Is your water clean? Who brings an income into this family? And how old is that person? And if the main income earner is under 12 years of age, that piece of paper, that piece of surveillance goes to the top of the deck so that that widow, that single mother, can possibly at least earn enough money during the harsh, terrible winters to feed her family and make heavy blankets, and then the heavy blankets are given away for free. Well, that's the kind of surveillance we need. Those are the kinds of surveys we need to ask, we need to understand. But we will never, ever, through the miles and miles and miles of footage that are picked up by these inhumane drones, we will never be able to understand the fundamental security that comes from treating other people fairly, from saying that my social security rests in equality and in treating other people as human beings. So yes, we have so much work to do at Hancock Field, and to all the people who go every week out to street heat at Hancock Field. Our thanks to all the people like Marianne who've gone in front of the prisons and the appeal boards and may yet go to prison. Our thanks to every person who has said, I will stand up to these drones. Our thanks and also our challenge. Thanks, Ed. And Marianne.
Kathy, thank you so much. I'm so grateful to be able to get in here and hear your full talk. I was actually late because I was accompanying my sister. So Ali, I'm sorry that I missed your part, your introduction. I was with my sister Claire, who is a part of the 7 co-defendants from the Kings Bay Plowshares. And so today we had many hours with her probation officer that came to fit her for her ankle bracelet. I have photos of this, but not to get into that. She was curious as to what the number of people in the United States are that are walking around with these ankle bracelets. And these people have to pay for their own ankle bracelets. So anyway, I wanted to mention that there are 4 of the co-defendants out on bail, $50,000 bail and $5,000 cash. I have a poster board here. I'm sorry I didn't make more copies, but if you have a cell phone where you could take a picture, you could take the addresses, and I've got, like Anne Tiffany has, I've got the pre-stamped postcards. These are the only things that the jails will allow into the, into the county jails in Georgia. So Peter brought up something, Peter Swords, which I thought was brilliant. And I wanted to tag something. Kathy, I would love for you to share about your presence and your fasting in Kings Bay, Georgia, to bring light to the issue of disarming our nuclear craziness. But what I was thinking about is, we know Sister Ardith Platty and Carol Gilbert from the Jonah House community have been nonstop going around the country to bring to light the work of ICAN, the International Campaign Against to Abolish Nuclear Weapons. And that's the work that Claire, who's now under house arrest, is asking for us to do, knowing that the nuclear arsenal is the cocked gun that the United States holds to the head of the planet, that allows us to continue to do what we do in Yemen, what we do in Afghanistan, what we've done in Iraq, what Israel does in Gaza, and on and on and on, and continue with our 800 bases around the world or beyond. But I'm thinking about what we can do locally to help move this story deep. And if you don't mind, I want to tell you something real quickly. There was an effort from David Swanson from World Beyond War, and also Code Pink, Medea Benjamin, Ariel Gold, to have an effort by mayors to look at how it is that they could use the money that was being taken by our tax dollars within our own communities. And there were many categories, including the benefits for veterans, our roads infrastructures, teachers' salaries, all of these things. So these categories are actually listed on a website called The Cost of War. And you can look this up yourselves. Anyway, we had an amazing, simple thing that happened in Ithaca. I was able to find people from these different categories to come to our little city council over the course of like 2 months and testify only had 3 minutes each, about what their category needed. And, you know, we had a friend from the transportation department that brought in the actual statistics, and all of this was handed to our city council. And in the meantime, I tagged our mayor, and I told him he's the youngest African-American mayor in the United States, Savante Murick. I said, Savante, I hope you're going to the mayor's conference in Florida in the mid-June. This was last year. He didn't know about it. So anyway, the council is all unanimously voting yes on this resolution that was written up by World Beyond War by David Swanson. And so Medea Benjamin called and she said, Marianne, we need to get this resolution bookmarked for the mayor's conference in Florida. So I called our mayor. He said, have my secretary do it. He went to Florida, which he had not planned on doing. There was a unanimous vote of 253 American mayors that voted to say no to the $50 billion increase in military spending by Trump. Mm-hmm. I mean, that was a very last-minute thing, but in the same structural way, I'm thinking that we can bring the resolution to have our mayors and our city councils across the country to do this for ICANN, to have the resolution that we would withdraw the monies from our pension plans, from Raytheon, Lockheed, and all of the other, you know, Grumman, all of the other military makers, and say, hell no, our tax dollars need to be used here. And again, it goes back to principle, not personality. It's what our needs are. It's very simple, but it's an idea. I don't have this. Only because you mentioned this, Peter, did I decided to get up here. I've just been percolating this.
Thank you, Marianne.
Yes.
You know, the countries that are the outliers are the United States and the nuclear-bearing countries that didn't sign to negotiate this agreement. And so we're going to do a walk in support of the Kings Bay Plowshares starting September 3rd to the 14th from Savannah to Kings Bay. So if anybody would like to come and join us, we'd be so pleased to have you. We finally worked out housing, which made me very relieved. And so your needs would be generally taken care of along the way on this walk, and then we can have a big rally at the end. And the people that are out and the people that are in represent tremendous courage, and we can give them support through what Marianne is suggesting, and also if you'd like to be part of a walk from Savannah to Kings Bay, we'd love it.
Yes, just wanted to mention that Liz McAllister, Phil Berrigan's widow, is still in, Father Steve Kelly is still in, and Mark Colville, who's also been a drone activist, and they are facing a maximum of 20 years in federal prison.
So they need lots of support.
Well, I'll be in the back with these later.
It looks like the trial will be in October, so let's stay tuned.
No, November or early December.
Oh, thank you.